sir, will you please be there and felicitate Professor Anandam Modak? I request Patil sir to also felicitate Dr. Ravi Mukherjee. Thank you, Patil sir. Please take your seat. May I now please request Dr. J. Mangai to felicitate Professor Shantanu Banerjee. Dr. Mangai will be felicitating Dr. Shantanu Yogi as well.
Let's try.
Thank you, ma'am. So now we start off with our panel discussion. I would like to have Reverend Patil to start off the panel discussion with the other dignitaries. So mics are there.
Devani, I need your help, okay? I need your help. Hold this.
So, a very good afternoon to you, friends. Cindy, the matter of playground is right for me. So, we had a couple of talks this morning, and now we're going to have a very scintillating, very interesting session. And this session is a panel discussion. In this particular session, we are going to talk about literature, language, communication skills, etc., etc. Right? Now, when we talk about literature or communication skills, we need to keep in mind two things. One, content, and two, code. Content refers to our thoughts, our ideas, our information, our feelings, our emotions, and a lot of other things, a bunch of other things. So content is very important. When we communicate with people around us, we need to keep in mind the content, the topic, the subject, the theme. At the same time, we should not neglect the other aspect, and the other aspect is code. Code means language. And these two, the content and the code, are inseparable. They are organically intertwined, interlinked, interconnected. Just as we cannot separate a dance from the dancer, we cannot separate the content from the code or the code from the content. So we have a wonderful panel of experienced scholars, and I'm going to request each one of the panelists to pick up or to choose one particular aspect of the topic that we are dealing with today and say something very important. And that something can be an idea, that something can be an experience, that something can be anything related to communication, related to language, related to literature. So may I now request Professor Moda to set the ball rolling.
So thank you, Professor Patil, and the organizers of this conference. So first of all, I am very happy that I share these days with not only a veteran like Professor Patil, but also my student, Dr. Obik Mukherjee. I really feel proud about his presence here on the days. He has done his PhD under my supervision, but he did not stop there, and because of his perseverance and tenacity, he went to do his postdoc from a foreign university and successfully did that. So I'm very happy and glad that I shared these days with people like Professor Patil, Professor Gautam Banerjee, Professor Santanu Banerjee, then Professor Santanu Niyogi, then Dr. Vanga, etc. So this is quite a privilege for me to be here. And we have been listening to discussions, especially I would like to refer to the keynote address by Professor Patil. He has so beautifully explained how literature can be used for the purpose of teaching language and more than that, for the purpose of effective communication. So I would like to stress upon or rather touch upon some of the basic aspects of language and communication. We often forget that language is an integral part of our very existence. Since our childhood, we create a bridge with other people, we create a connection with other people only through language. It is only language that helps us to create that kind of bonding with other people. And if you look into the books of communication, you will find that communication, like many English words, it is derived from a word which is Latin in origin. It is some books say, most of the textbooks say that it is communicare. Am I right, Professor Patil? And communicare in Latin, it means to share. That means communication is basically sharing something, sharing with our fellow human beings. Now, what do we share? We share a piece of message, we share a news item, we share our ideas, we share even our emotions, feelings. So, whenever there is an act of sharing, there is some kind of communication. So we communicate with our fellow beings and in order to share something. So we have to remember these basic things, and language is one of the mediums of communication. There are other aspects of, there are other mediums also, like Professor Patil also touched upon this particular aspect of non-verbal communication, and Mr. Sudhir Neelkantham, he also talked about silence. That, and I was reminded of Browning's poetry when Mr. Commissioner was talking about silence, that in Browning's poetry, his dramatic monologues, only one character speaks. The other characters remain silent. But in spite of remaining silent, they communicate something through their silence. That means their silence becomes quite eloquent. Their silence in Browning's poetry becomes quite eloquent. So silence is a non-verbal mode of communication, and like silence, we have other modes, other non-verbal modes of communication. Like now that I am communicating with you, I am using the word of mouth. But at the same time, I am looking at you. Suppose I was suppose I am using the mouth, word of mouth, but I will be looking outside the window. So, would you feel interested to listen to me? Not at all. So obviously, this eye contact with you, it creates a kind of connection. It creates a rapport. So my verbal communication, that means when I am using the word of the mouth, I am using language. Verbal means not only the word of the mouth, but also written language. We often use this word verbal in a rather casual, loose sense. And like, say, he said it to me verbally. That means what we mean to say, we communicated it to me orally, using the word of mouth. But verbal actually means relating to language, any kind of language, oral or written. So when I am communicating with you, I am using my eye contact, I am using my facial expressions, I am using my bodily gestures, etc. So all these things actually they emphasize my verbal communication. They help to focus my verbal communication on my audience. So we use facial expressions, we use our gestures, postures, etc. The way we stand, the way we sit. During interviews, we are in very alert positions. We do not sit casually. But when we are talking with friends, you might have noticed we sit quite casually or stand quite casually, which is not possible during formal locations. So, not only we use language, we also use non-verbal modes of communication to communicate something. And Professor Pati was quite right in stressing the role of tone. In stressing the role of tone. Like those of you who are literature students who might have some taste in reading plays, you might have noticed how English sentences can be used differently. Like say the same playwright is writing, say Shakespeare, he is writing both for the hero as well as for the villain. Shakespeare is writing both for Othello and for Iago. So that same person is using different kinds of not only language but also tonal effects. And the same sentence can be interpreted through different tonal effects. Like there is a famous line in Macbeth, we fail. These two words, and these two words make a sentence. Now, if you use it to different tonal effects, like you may stress on we or you may stress on fail, like say, we fail, or you may say, we failed. So the stress readily changes when you change the stress on a particular word. We failed, like we failed, that means we are so invincible, we cannot fail. Or we failed, that means we failed, we cannot think of failing ever. Or you may even say it in the way of saying, we failed, so something like that. So different tonal effects this sentence may have. The same sentence. There are many more examples. In fact, in case when you read a play, you can easily understand these tonal effects. That's why it often becomes necessary to read a play aloud. So that helps you to understand the overtones of a play or even the undertones in a sentence. Now, okay. So language is one of the mediums of communication I have said. Now, even when you learn a language properly, you can frame sentences in a language, say the English language. You have to take care of the contextuality of the language, in which context you are speaking. Even when you know how to frame a sentence, you need to know about the context in which you are speaking. So if you cannot understand the context, then you may fall into a pitfall. Let's say there is a person called say A. That person is asking B, uh, can you tell me the way to the railway station? And in reply, B says, the lane destroyed the crops. So what B says is is a correct English sentence. But this is not the appropriate response you can easily understand to A sentence. Because B cannot understand the context in which A asked this question. So that contextuality has to be taken into account. So thank you. Other speakers are also there. They will put in their views. I hand over the microphone to Professor Bati.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Modak, for your brilliant ideas. I would request the participants to jot down their questions and queries. If you have any questions, please write them down on a piece of paper, and you can ask those questions later after the discussion is over. So I would like to just focus on one particular point that was raised by Professor Modak, and that is context. Now there are three types of context. One, physical context. And physical context refers to the when and the where. When is the action taking place? Where is the action taking place? So when you answer these two questions, you in fact talk about physical context. When is the action taking place? Where is the action taking place? That is physical context. The second type of context is linguistic context. For example, you come across a new word, an unfamiliar word, you don't know the meaning of that particular word. You can look at other words in the poem, in the story, in the essay, and you can use those other items, vocabulary items, to interpret the unknown word. That is linguistic context. And the third type of context is psychological context. The characters in a play, the characters in a novel or a short story have certain moods, and the moods can be happy or unhappy. And those moods also facilitate the process of interpretation. Right? We arrive at a legitimate kind of interpretation on the basis of physical context, linguistic context, and psychological context. So thank you very much, Professor Modak, for highlighting the importance, the role of context in communication skills. Thank you so much. So please write down your questions, and we'll have a question-answer session. Yeah, please.
Actually, Professor Zibel Patil pointed out one very important thing. And we must remember that we are all actually teachers of language. And when we teach language, we try to train the learners in such a way so that they can become competent users of the target language. And in their use of language, their utterances must be grammatically correct, semantically meaningful, and situationally appropriate. So I think these are the three most important conditions that a language user has to keep in mind. Remember that famous example by Noam Chomsky. Colorful green ideas sleep furiously. This is a perfect grammatically, it's a grammatically correct sentence, but semantically it's not meaningful. Now, we can utter grammatically correct sentences, semantically meaningful sentences, but if it is not situationally appropriate, the communication fails. So that's what I want to say.
Thank you very much, Professor Yogi, for your brilliant comments, brilliant addition to what Professor Modak has already said. Now, I would like to highlight just one point that was raised by Professor Yogi, and that is appropriateness. Now, in a situation where English is being taught as a second language or as a foreign language, our priorities are enabling our learners to use the English language in written form, in spoken form, confidently. So in my opinion, confidence is very important. So we want to enable our learners to use the English language confidently, fluently, appropriately and accurately. Confidence, fluency, appropriateness, and accuracy. Accuracy takes a back seat, but most of us focus on correcting mistakes of spelling and grammar and so on. But please remember, accuracy is important, but not as important as appropriateness is. And our colleague, our friend, Professor Neogi has rightly pointed out the importance of appropriateness. I'll just give you one simple example and then hand over the mic to other colleagues. Once I went to Chennai, and one of my former students saw me from a distance. And he was very delighted. He was elated to see me in Chennai. He came running to me and said, "Oh, Professor Patil, think of the devil and the devil is there." Now, I didn't blame him, I blamed myself because I had taught him the expression, but I had not taught him when to use, with whom, for whom to use the expression. So I would have been happy if he had said, for example, think of the angel and the angel is there. I expected him to replace the word devil by the word angel. So that is exactly what Professor Neogi means by being appropriate. That think of the devil and the devil is there is grammatically correct, semantically meaningful, but situationally, interpersonally, and even culturally to some extent, not appropriate. Appropriateness is very important. Unfortunately, we teach accuracy in our classrooms. We don't teach appropriateness. We should highlight the importance of being appropriate. Thank you very much, Professor Neogi, for your contribution. So please keep your questions ready on a piece of paper. Now, I request Professor Gautam Banerjee to choose one particular aspect of either language or literature or communication and tell us his experiences. Professor Banerjee, Professor Gautam Banerjee.
Thank you, Professor Patil. Honorable guests of the dais and the honorable people of the dais and my dear students. The deliberation what we have heard today, at the very beginning of the session, that whether this language can be taught through literature. And a very burning topic has put up here that responding to climate crisis, that how this climate crisis could bring into the classroom situation and we can teach all the four language skills, that listening, speaking, reading and writing, that which the four skills we say, the two active skills and passive skills. As Professor Patil has just said, that we have to first clearly denote that what is going to be taught in the class. Now, generally what I say that what is going to be taught in the class, what is known as the declarative knowledge, because generally we divide, that our domain of knowledge are divided into two parts. One is the declarative knowledge, that what is to be taught as a text in one word, and how this is going to be taught in the classroom situation. What is the procedural knowledge? Now, once the declarative knowledge, the text has been fixed, here, what we are going to thrust upon, that was about the climate change and the climate crisis. It has become a burning topic. I would like to just read out a few lines of the book from the Northeast literature. The name of the book is The Son of the Thundercloud. The book has been written by Eastern Hide. Before him stretched miles of barrenness. The earth was so dry that the soil no longer looked like soil. It had cracked apart, every brittle vein and ligament exposed. His eyes scanned the horizon for people, though he asked himself how anyone could possibly survive here. After losing all his family in a terrible famine, a man leaves his village with just the clothes on his back, never once looking back. For endless miles he walks through a landscape and desolate as his heart. Until two ancient women who have waited for rain for 400 years lead him to the village of weavers, where a prophecy will be fulfilled. A single drop of rain will impregnate the tiger widow, and her son will slay the spirit tiger. The traveler will help the woman bring out the boy. He will witness miracle and tragedy and come close to finding a home again. And he will learn that love and life are eternal. The story goes like this, that there are three women. One is 400 years old, another is 380 years old, and the third one is 280 years old, Mesanio, Cathanio, and Circe. And according to this fable, this is said that the third one will be impregnated by a drop of rain, and she will give birth to a son. And in return, when the son will grow up, at the age of 10, he will kill this tiger. The tiger is an evil spirit. And then in return, that the age of 10 itself, the villagers will think that he has done some mischief and it was not right to do so, and they kill that boy. So it's a beautiful story, it's a beautiful book. Can I take it as a text in the classroom and talk about the climate? Because it has all, the full book, what I have noticed that this is full of, the climate change and what it could be. Though this is a Naga story, Naga lyrical short story, the legend, and this book has got the Hindu prize and all. But if we can take it for the context, then the second what we have to think that how we go about it. But apart from that, I must tell you that every student, every individual got the liberty to learn in his own way, what we generally call the meta-learning. It's not that there's something prescribed, what is prescribed in the course is to be, taken by the student as it is. There are so many books on this learner-centered classroom and the liberty of the student, so on and so forth. In the later section, Professor Patil will be knowing it much better. Now, let me talk about if we can put the content part of it, and as well as that how this is going to be taught in the classroom, both the things together in a better way, and we can create metacognitive learning or metacognitive knowledge in the classroom situation. Now, how it is going to be learned? Again, I must say that there are hundreds of papers are there on the net you can see. But very simply, I can tell you that you just remember 4C. The C, the third letter of the alphabet. Just remember that C. That here, your focus is on communication. Remember that. So the first C is the communication. The second C will be the collaboration. Then how will you communicate? Through the collaboration. That is the group discussion, debate, etc., etc. You can take it in the classroom situation. And the third C is the creativity. That you have to think about the creativity, especially for the students of engineering, as we just heard, that they are not very serious about taking the class of English because they find that there is something lacking in taking the English as a literature, or the language is dry in that way. So what I wanted to say that when I was talking about creativity, so in that creativity you have to think about the conscious thinking. Again, you just note down 3 points. The conscious thinking about the student, that they must be very consciously thinking about what it is going to be done. And then the language component, I must say the language learning, because those 4 skills have to be developed, that how he is going to use the 4 skills in the classroom situation, and then there should be the perception of the reality of the students. These 3 dimensions should be taken care of the students. And the fourth and the last one, what I wanted to say is the transfer of learning, as we have heard, in the morning, that can we really take up the whole thing right from the classroom situation, from the 4 walls, and take it out of the classroom and to make the people understand, the effect of the global warming, the effect of the coal mining of this region, or the open, the mouth coal mining, what will be the effect? Now, when a student is learning something about the climate, that how the climate conditions could be changing through taking out the sands from the river, is completely, they're diverting the river water, and at times you will find the what you call this coal mining area, you will find that a lots of hazards are coming up in a very natural way, because we are not very concerned about it. And now at this juncture, I remember one very famous sign by that I think Zabum. Once he said that that if we look at the veins of the leaf and the branches of the tree, we can see the nature's mind map. Now, if we can take this nature's mind map, the very word for mind map in the classroom situation, then how can we take this mind map? Because this is the combination of 2 words. The mind map is the word, you have to be very careful about it, and as well as, the picture. That these 2 can be used as a very important tool, the critical tool in the classroom situation to take up this challenge. And finally, I must tell you that we are talking about the millennium, the students of this millennium. We haven't yet started talking about the students of Generation Z or the Alpha students. We have to be very careful about it, because nearly 90 million, the first time voters are coming up. And they have the same aspirational index of the Paris, London, and New York. How will you cater to the need of those students, those who will be coming to your institution? Think about that. Because if we have been, coming across the buzzwords like buzzwords like like Misty Hub. Can we make it an educational hub? This institution. There are so many hubs are coming up here and there, and you think about it, that how you will go about it and bring up your institution, make it a challenge to the next generation students, those who will be coming with the aspiration to be a good communicator. Thank you all. Thank you, sir, for this.
Thank you, Dr. Banerjee, for your contribution, valuable contribution. When we talk about climate, we naturally talk about environment. And environment is all-inclusive. It includes, for example, different species like reptiles and other animals and birds and marine life. Now, we need to discuss all these things when we teach poetry or when we teach prose in our classroom. For example, Wordsworth has a beautiful poem called Upon Westminster Bridge. And it sort of talks in a poetic manner about industrialization and the ill effects of industrialization, etc., etc. In this context, we also need to nourish the affective domain of our students what happens in most classrooms is there is a lot of intellectual discussion. Poems are taught, they are dissected, and they are criticized, and answers are marked up or memorized, and then they are just thrown out in the answer book. For example, Lawrence has a poem called Snake. Now, we can use this poem as a launching pad to sensitize our learners or students to how we need to coexist, how we need to live together harmoniously in the world. And we means human beings and animals and birds and marine animals and so on and so forth. So in the poem, the poet says, the situation in the poem is like this. Lawrence has a water tank in the backyard of the house, and he has a pitcher in his hand, and he wants to fetch some. And then he starts thinking. He's in two minds. His intellectual mind asks him to kill the snake, but his heart, his emotional mind says, no, don't kill the snake, because the snake is the first comer. In fact, the poet has a claim on the water in the tank, but the snake has the first claim, right? So the snake is the first visitor, the snake is the first comer. The snake is not only the first comer, but a guest. The snake is not only a guest, but king in exile. The snake is not only a first comer, not only a guest, not only a king in exile. The snake is Lord of life. The snake is Lord of life. So respecting other species and living harmoniously together with them is one lesson that we need to highlight in our language classrooms or literature classrooms. Thank you very much, Professor Banerjee, for your beautiful ideas, wonderful ideas. Now, may I request Professor Santanu Banerjee to pick up any aspect of language or literature or communication and share your experiences with us.
Thank you very much. I think I'm audible perfectly.
Yeah.
So, first of all, I must thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to make use of this platform to address you from here, especially in this conference which is focusing on language and communication. And certainly I will focus on language, I will focus on communication, but a bit differently. Since morning, we have been listening to various learned speakers talking on language and communication. By language, they mean the verbal or the written language, and by communication, they either mean communication through the verbal words or the written words, or through the bodily gesticulations, mostly, if I'm not wrong. But I believe that there can be more options for us when we think deeply, thoroughly on language and communication. For the last 3 or 4 years in our university, that is in Kazi Nazrul University, Asansol, we have been trying to make certain experiments with the help of our students in this area of communication, which cannot be simply called verbal, cannot be called written, but something very different. I can give you some idea by citing certain examples. We as human beings, as my favorite historian Yuval Noah Harari writes, we as human beings believe in stories because we govern this world with stories. Stories of all sorts. And stories help us to organize. Stories help us to become human beings. And the world in which we live, actually, is a kind of world where we have ample number of stories, umpteen number of stories. There is no dearth of stories. In this industrial zone, we have already collected thousands of tales relating to music, relating to food, smell, to building, to various sensory experiences like touch, etc. And I think that they also very effectively communicate. I give some examples. Say in Asansol, near the Asansol bus stand, there is a place called Basti Bazaar, where is a small alley, one may often find, named as the Little Street. And for the last 100 years, there is a shop set up by some Mr. Haziq Saab, who have been selling perfumes, others. Now the story goes back to 1857, when the Sepoy Mutiny took place, and the perfume capital of India, we all know, that is near Gorakhpur. I mean, it was almost devastated, and the perfumers, they wanted to find new markets, new centers. And railway at that time helped quite a lot in joining Asansol with the northern provinces, and the perfumers, they got the chance to come down from their own place, the native place, to West Bengal, to Calcutta, and ultimately to Asansol, to establish certain shops. And since then, we find perfumes sold by those perfumers in that very alley in Asansol. Recently, in our university's museum, we put up an exhibition, a different kind of exhibition altogether. We call it Gandhapicha, an olfactory exhibition. And we displayed some amount of scents, perfumes. Not all of these scents smelling very good, but certain smell which we don't like so much, like the smell from the fish market or from the dumping ground. We collected these smells and we exhibited these smells. The purpose for us was very clear. We wanted to communicate to people about certain realities relating to Asansol, the history and heritage of Asansol. We pass through the alleys of Asansol, we look at buildings, we shop, we meet with people, talk to them, and we often don't pay attention to the very fact that this industrial zone has been developed gradually, step by step, in the last 200 years. And there are buildings, there are warehouses, there are shops, markets, so many interesting things which contain their very significant stories, which in fact tell us a lot about this place and the people. Now, we pass through the city of Asansol, maybe with our eyes open, we can see a lot of things. We always pass through with our ears open, we listen to a lot of things. But all the time we breathe and we don't pay much attention to the sense of smell. We can't avoid the air because we need to breathe all the time. And the more we breathe, actually, the more we intake various kinds of smell, and they influence, they put their impact, on our knowledge of the world. I am saying all these things in the context that when the perfumers came down to Asansol, they established their shop. They created, in fact, a sea change in the climate of aroma in Asansol. Prior to that, there were certain fundamental smells, basic smells, and all of these smells communicated. But after the arrival of these perfumes and after people started making use of these perfumes, we find a completely new kind of communication through aroma. Not just good or bad smell, but different kinds of smell communicating different sorts of things to different groups of people. Say, there is a perfume, I think people may be knowing, its name is Majmua, which actually means congregation. And it is used especially in the Fridays by people belonging to certain religious communities. And whenever we get that smell, we try to understand that this smell is related to a particular religious community. Now, this may be quite wrong because smell is nobody's property. If I start using that perfume, that aroma on my body, I will also communicate in the same manner with that odor. This is about smell. I can also tell you the tales of certain food items One is my favorite, that is a piece of cake that is known as a Sansol Jati cake. And how's the bakers in the Sansol, they have been baking this piece of cake for the last 150 years. And this cake is a product of communication between the native people with the Scottish people. Because you must be knowing that Dundee is a very important city in Scotland. So when railway came to Asansol, a lot of European people came and settled in Asansol, mostly Scottish. And the Indian bakers, they got a chance to enter into the kitchen of the railway officers to learn the art of cooking this delicacy. And thereafter, they established their shop and they started selling this food product to the people of Asansol. So during the weeks in and around, say, Christmas, we find the bakers of Asansol selling this Asansol Dandi. This Asansol Dandi is a product of communication between the native people and the colonizers. And from there on, whenever we taste this food, we often get, a kind of feeling of this communication. We can communicate about Indian cultures, their behavior, their attitude through this. So there can be buildings, there can be touches, there can be music, there can be food, which are not, in this sense, verbal or written, oral or written. This cannot be just limited to simply communication through body languages. We also communicate with these things. So with these words, and thanks to the organizers for giving me the opportunity, I conclude.
Thank you very much, Professor Shantanu Banerjee, for your very significant contribution to the discussion. Yes, all of us know that we can communicate in different ways. For example, there is olfactory communication, there is tactile communication, there is visual communication, and there is auditory communication. So we listen to people, we see things, we smell things, we try or taste things, and all these are different ways of communicating, receptively or productively, with people and things and objects and places all around us. Thank you very much for this. So please keep your questions ready. We have two more panelists. May I now request the panelists to be as brief as possible because we are running short of time and we need to reserve some time for questions and answers. So I now request Professor Abhik Mukherjee to very briefly say whatever he wants to say.
Hello. Okay, so good afternoon everyone. This is my, I just, after coming here, I am just getting filled with nostalgia because this is the college where I worked for 10 years. And particularly I am sharing the stage with my guide, and I am his first scholar, so for two reasons this is a very special occasion for me. So in very few minutes, very short period of time, I can say one thing about my experience in the American academics, that how American academics, I have an opportunity to see very closely as a Fulbright scholar. So I worked at Washington State University, and I had seen that what is the basic difference between American academics and Indian academics. Why American academics is ruling the world. In any subject, the best professor is an American. So this particular aspect probably lies in their societal structure, what I observed. Our students are not that dedicated, not that hardworking, probably because they do not fund their study, mostly. Number one. And I have seen that probably at the age of 13 or 14, nobody stay with their parents, they decide their own life, they decide their own course, and higher education is very expensive, and they have to work. Some of them have more than 2 jobs to work, and they are also taking the course what they want. So this sort of societal structure, and Americans work more hours than anybody on earth, that I have seen in my own eyes. So, and our English professors are just beyond their imagination. The life we lead here in India, like kings and queens. My professor Carol Siegel, I saw her, she wrote 7 books, all published from American University Press. She was the keynote speaker in the D.H. Lawrence conference in Italy. but she doesn't have a home, doesn't have a car. She had to commute every day by bus. And her salary is very, very, very much the salary. And they are not paid for 12 months, just 9 months payment. These 3 months they can offer a summer school. If at least 13 students enroll for the summer school, only they will be paid for 2 more months, but not for the 3 months. But why they decide to come to academics? Even a bus driver earns. My landlord was a carpenter and his education level is 12 pass. He has a plane. He charges $700 per hour, and my professor earns more than $10 per hour. Why did they come to academics? Because of their passion. When I told her that I'm really grateful that you are sacrificed so much for studying English literature, he said, Ovik, don't say it is a sacrifice. I really enjoyed it. So don't say it is a sacrifice. So with these few words, I just want to complete my speech. Thank you so much for inviting me again. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mukherjee, for your vital contribution to the proceedings today. Please keep your questions ready. We are the last panelist. May I now request Dr. Mange to express her views related to literature, language, and communication.
Thank you, sir. I would like to throw some light on millennial classroom, what kind of students we need, and how we are going to tackle all those things. And I would like to focus on factors that affects changes in the millennial classroom. These are the factors. The first one is industrial change. Industry, it's totally transformed, and we live in a different world. It's totally transformed. Even our classrooms, it's transformed after this COVID-19. We started using, integrating all ICT tools and online tools. Even the slow learners, they open up in class as they were shy to open up in the real classroom. In virtual classroom, they started to open up. For that, literature really helps us. Literature helps us to open up in a real classroom. So these are the factors that changes us, the transformation. And information technology revolution. That is the other factor. And the most important one is globalization. Globalization, it affects our classrooms. And then knowledge sharing, how we share our knowledge. After that, we are in a real classroom now. We transformed into interactive classrooms. Earlier, it was fully text-based. Now, we believe in interactive classroom. It was a monologue earlier. Now, it's interactive. We make our learners to participate in classroom. That's a challenge, but anyway, the new millennial classroom, it really helps a teacher using different gadgets, using different tools available. Now we have modern tools. Earlier we had only flashcards and other things. And a teacher has to enact in class. They have to bring in that character into our classroom. Through that, they taught language. That was a wonderful methodology used by our teachers. But nowadays, we transformed into a different level. That transformation, that challenge, we just take it in a different way, and it really helps us to bring it in a visual mode, and we just give the natural effect inside the classroom, and in that way we make our learners to learn effectively in our classroom. So these are the factors I would like to focus on. Over to Dr. Pai.
Thank you, Dr. Mange, for a very practical experience that you shared with us. Now, in this particular context, I'd like to cite my own experience. One day I was teaching daffodils in my third year BA classroom, and I drew the attention of my students, my learners, to one specific word in the poem, and that word was host. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high over vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils. and I threw the question to my class. I said, what do you think is the meaning of the word host? Contextual meaning, right, of the word host. And they came up with brilliant responses, brilliant interpretations. One student said, as most of us say, host here means plenty of, innumerable, uncountable. The poet saw uncountable, innumerable flowers, daffodils. That is the usual interpretation. But there were students in my class who were deviant thinkers, who were divergent thinkers. They were not convergent thinkers. They were creative thinkers, critical thinkers. And one of them said, sir, in my opinion, host here means host in relation to guest. Now, who is playing the role of the host in this poem? The flowers are the host, because they are dancing, they are tossing their heads, they are dancing with delight, and they are entertaining the poet becomes the guest. So the flowers become the host, the poet becomes the guest. This is a beautiful and deviant, foregrounded kind of interpretation of the word host. Another student said, sir, I have another interpretation. I said, wonderful, please go ahead. And the student said, sir, in biology, we have the term host and the term parasite, right? A host in biology means a big tree or a big animal. And a parasite means a creeping plant which goes up with the support of a big tree. And a big animal like a buffalo is the host, and a flea, for example, is a parasite. So the poet is a parasite, and the flowers are the host. The flowers are the host, and the poet is the guest. So you see, host and guest relationship, and host and parasite relationship, and of course the third one was the usual one. So I think you made a very important point. Our classrooms need to be interactive. And when we make our classroom interactive and participatory, our students come up with brilliant interpretations. In literature, 2 plus 2 don't make 4. 2 plus 2 make 5 or 3 or even 2. Because nothing is wrong. Everything is legitimate. You can say that Hamlet is a comedy, but you need to prove. You need to produce textual clues, textual illustrations, textual evidence to show that Hamlet is a comedy, right? So all these things can be done when your classrooms are interactive. Thank you very much, Dr. Mange, for a brilliant approach to the teaching of literature. Now, Dr. Niyogi, Professor Niyogi would like to say something very briefly.
Thank you, Professor Patil, for giving me this opportunity. Actually, as language teachings, we use literature, what we call in applied linguistics or English language teaching theory, the lang-lit theory. And in the post-colonial context, when we are using texts from different cultures, texts which were originally produced in different languages other than English, we have a very difficult situation in the classroom. For example, Professor Gautam Banerjee was advocating the use of a text that originated in the Northeast. Now, as we know, through the theory of Edward Sapir and Benjamin V. Wolf, that each language actually inculcates a particular worldview in the language user's mind. So my worldview is shaped by my mother tongue, which is Bangla, and which is quite different from the worldview inculcated in the mind of an Eskimo language speaker. So if we are using a text that was originally produced in the Northeast, that contains the worldview of the Northeast language speakers, then it was translated into English, then we are presenting the same text to the speakers who are speakers of Bangla or Hindi. Now, there is certainly a conflict of worldviews or difference of worldviews, which we often forget to point out, to the learners, and as a result of that, there may be confusions in understanding. For example, last summer, London was as hot as Kolkata. Now, suppose when we teach the line, shall I compare thee to a summer's day to an Indian student, we have to explain that, see, this was written by someone who actually belongs to the United Kingdom, and their summer is a very pleasant season. The situation it actually alters, So that kind of problems I am talking about, and as language teachers, we will have to be conscious about that, and we should clarify these little nuances to the learners. That is my point. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Miyagi. It was wonderful listening to you. One last point that comes up from Dr. Miyagi, Professor Miyagi's discussion is, there is a beautiful novel by William Golding, and the title of the novel is The Inheritors. In that particular novel, the protagonist happens to be a primitive. We are so-called advanced people, and we are so self-centered that we think that the whole universe revolves or evolves around us. So our reference point is I and me and my and mine. But the hero in that novel says, the trees went away. Actually, he himself went away. But he uses the tree as a reference point, not himself as a reference point. So this is very important, and this needs to be brought to the attention of the learner. And the other thing is the culture. That language and culture, literature and culture are inseparable. We can never ever separate language from culture, and language from literature, or culture from a language, and so on and so forth. That's a wonderful example. Because Shakespeare says, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? It's a compliment in Britain, because in Britain, summer is a pleasant season. But in Nagpur, in Maharashtra, if I say the same thing to one of my colleagues, maybe you say to your wife, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? The other person will not take it as a compliment. It's a left-handed compliment. So thank you very much. Now, it's time, I would request Saujanya to say something, and then maybe we'll take a few questions and we'll call it a day.
I just have, as we were looking at the panel discussion today, we were contemplating about the various nuances of literature we could bring into the classroom. Again, I bring back the same point here, because now in various areas, we are now delegating to understand more to do with employability skills. So the biggest challenge now is, as language teachers, it's very important. We have a passion for studying and pursuing a course. When you start looking at your livelihood, when you start getting into the classroom, the biggest challenge is how are you going to use those pieces of literature which could actually help in improving, number one, ELP classes, okay, and two, the employability skills, and three, how do you actually help students improve their confidence and all of that? Because I think we have seen examples, we are very passionate about our literature areas, but to be functional in our classrooms, it becomes quite a big challenge. And that, especially keeping in mind the millennial classroom. How relevant does this get into our classrooms? That's been a continuous debate. So that's something which I was looking forward to also deliberating about. Maybe we could take about half a minute each of us to talk about it, and then we could close it.
Very briefly to that point. Very briefly.
Yeah, so it's a very good question that how we can use literature when I teach presentation, for example. So the beginning of the presentation should be unusual. When I teach that, I give reference to Shakespearean plays. If you look at some of the Shakespearean plays, for example, Tempest, for example, Macbeth, the first scene is sound, thunder, lightning. And if you read Shakespearean stage, you know how that sound was created, right? What is the dramatic purpose? That why the first scene is so noisy? Even the Antony and Cleopatra, the greatest tragedy of the world, starting with a scene where people are abusing Cleopatra as a whole. The word is Shakespeare. Why is languages are used in the first scene? Because to grab the attention of the audience. So if the presenter knows that why Shakespeare plays or works of his hit in our presenter's language, so we will understand the strategy, the psychological strategy he used to attract the attention of the audience. Probably this is a good learning for the presenter who will present in a corporate atmosphere in audiovisual presentation. Thank you.
I would like to refer to Shakespeare again. Most often used what to be or not to be. That's the question. So these are the contributions made by Shakespeare, all writers, and that can be transferred into the way in which they use language in their professional field. So that can be adopted in classrooms.
Thank you very much. For example, there is a ruling party in the parliament and the opposition party in the parliament. I'm not talking about India, I'm talking about countries in general. So there is a ruling party, there is an opposition party, and the opposition party says to the leader of the ruling party, all the perfumes from Arabia cannot sweeten your hands because you are corrupt, because you are accused of murdering someone. So literature can always be used in specific contexts. And you can always say, I didn't criticize you, I just read a few lines or said a few lines from Shakespeare. Thank you very much. So, any questions? Very, very brief and pointed questions.
Do you have any questions in the house? I think panelists try to make it as relevant as you. Yeah, please.
Very brief.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, madam. The session was really insightful. I was wondering about the definition of classroom, as after pandemic it has been broadened up. The space is really vast. The students who are actually fearing to communicate to make it more effective, as I'm quoting Kamala Dashi in her poem, Introduction, the language of speech becomes mine. So it's distortions, the squareness, the imperfection. How to appreciate those imperfections, squareness of a student, and for effective communication, first the communication should be made. Then we are thinking about the effectiveness of that communication. How to encourage that, how to appreciate that squareness, and how to make it effective or perfect, or is it really necessary? So I was wondering about this perspective.
Yeah,
Yes, this is a very vital question. The thing which I was just telling, in my deliberation, that the perception of reality, the picture what she has just portrayed, is really very difficult nowadays, especially at the age of this digitalization and all. It's a psychological problem. This psychological problem can be tackled not by any prescriptive rule. There is no hard and fast rule that you come to the classroom and these things are to be done and the student will learn that. Because when I was saying that every individual got, every student got the liberty to learn in his own way. Remember this thing. You will know one to teach them. The once you think that you are going to teach them is gone. So you have to give them the liberty. Now, once you give them the liberty, then how much of the liberty should you give? That the question comes. Then how can you control the classroom? The problem is that, it is prescriptive grammar type. What we are doing is the prescriptive one. But if you go for the descriptive one, you will find that there are ample opportunities to tackle the classroom. Sometimes we say the maturity of the teacher, sometimes we say the experience of the teacher, the how Professor Patel can, the control the class. Maybe it was not possible for a, youngster to go to the class and tackle the thing. He can tell the stories. 1, 2, 3 stories, anecdotes. He can motivate the students. He can bring the focus of the student. Because as we all know that, that every individual got an attention span.
attention and being here. We break for lunch, and once we are done with lunch at around 2:30 p.m., you gather up again over here, and then we direct you to your respective rooms where your presentations will be simultaneously taking place. So thank you so much.
So let me thank my panelists who did a wonderful job, and their contribution to the proceedings, to the discussion was wonderful, simply enriching and enlightening. Thank you very much, sir, for your contribution. We cannot call it a day without thanking you, because we are we because you are there. We are panelists because you are there. Without you, we are incomplete. So thank you so much for participating, for raising issues, asking questions, and offering experiences. Thank you very much. Thank you.